Welcome everyone to Openness from Pedagogy to Practice. This is our third event in the Open Education Week series at UTS this week. And I'm David from the LX Lab. My colleague Mace is here as well. And we are really lucky to have Mahabeli with us, Professor Mahabeli, I should say. And so before I hand over to Maha, as usual, I would like to acknowledge country. So we gratefully acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose ancestral lands UTS City Campus stands. We pay respect to their elders, both past and present, acknowledging them as the traditional custodians of knowledge for this land. And we further acknowledge the peoples of the various ancestral lands from which you join us today, since I'm sure we have people coming from all over Australia and all over the world. And we also want to pay respects to those elders past and present. Now, the image in the background here is not from Gadigal country. It's actually from where I am, which is Dungari country. And so I just want to pay respects to Dungari elders and acknowledge them as the custodians of knowledge for this land. Dungari titienbari, ngungung parang, ngundakang, ngara, ngari ngaria, marumba. So listen, pay attention to Maha as she presents today. The photo that's there is from Yarrabini rainforest, which is the mountain close to where I am here, and a very special and sacred place. So I just wanted to share that with you. In terms of our agenda, that's it from me. We're going to hear from Maha about openness from pedagogy to practice. In fact, I think your presentation's called something slightly different, Maha, but I'll do an official introduction now. So Mahabeli is a professor of practice at the Center for Learning and Teaching at the American University in Cairo, if you weren't aware, with a PhD in education from the University of Sheffield, United Kingdom, co-founder of Virtually Connecting, which is a grassroots movement that challenges academic gatekeeping at conferences. Also, Maha is the co-facilitator of Equity Unbound, an equity-focused, open, connected, intercultural learning curriculum, which has also branched into academic community activities. These activities include Continuity with Care, Socially Just Academia, which is another collaboration with One HE, Community Building Resources and MyFest, and which is an innovative 3-month professional learning journey. If you're not familiar with Maha's work, I'm just posting a link to her blog. And more recently, you've been exploring entangled openness in the most recent paper, I think, whereby open practices require complex interplay between open attitudes, social justice practices, and digital literacies within a team. So enough from me.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you so much for that. First of all, I'd like to start with saying Assalamu alaikum. This just means peace upon you, and it works for any time zone. You know, it works for morning, night, hi, bye, all of that. So it works really great for when we're on different time zones. And David, I was really touched by the way you did the land acknowledgement. I hate when people do it in a performative way, and yours was not performative at all. I felt like my heart racing when I listened to that. So thank you. I'm grateful to hear that. Thank you everyone for coming today. So the title of my talk ended up being Towards Openness that Promotes Social Justice. And my Twitter handle is Beli_Maha. So if you want to tweet these slides, are Creative Commons by non-commercial. So you can tweet them out, you can use them. I'm going to share the link. Mace is going to share the link in a minute. And just as long as you attribute and you don't sell them, you're fine. You can do whatever else you want with them and reuse them if you want, or parts of them. So I always like to start any session with asking, how are you feeling today? I started doing this early in the days of the pandemic because everyone was going through a roller coaster of emotions. So tell me in the chat, thank you, Mice, for putting the link to the slides. Tell me in the chat, please, how are you feeling today? And it can be multiple things. Sometimes people say one word, but what if you're feeling both excited and exhausted? You know, that's totally fine. Okay, grateful, happy, inspired, excited, creative, interested. Inspired by the OEW talks. That's great to hear. And hot in Sydney. Yeah, it's hot in Cairo too. It's supposed to be winter, but it's hot. I know it's already summer for you. Tired, excited to be here, excited, curious. Hi, Gemma. Tired and busy, engaged in this session. It's good to hear. Inspired, just came from wonderful International Women's Day speech. Awesome. Oh yeah, I sometimes forget when that is, but someone reminded me of that yesterday. Curious, sunshine, glad to be here. Curious. All right, that's great to hear. All right, I will move on. Just so you know, the link to the slides that Mace just shared earlier, which is bit.ly/UTS Valley, is open for commenting. So beyond this session, if there's a slide you want to get back to, you want to talk to me about it, you want to put a comment for me, I'll see it later and I'll respond then. Thanks for posting it again. Nice. All right. I also want to ask you another question. What nourishes you lately? What are the things that nourish you? And again, I think when the pandemic started, it became really important to acknowledge what are the things that nourish us so that we could remember to do them and not be burnt out with anxiety and everything else that we were going through. And I think we're still a bit burnt out. Swimming at the beach, birthday messages, happy birthday, praying and meditating, sleep, playing ball with my dog, conversations, stone fruit season. Oh, peaches and plums. People and their knowledge, stretching, being outside. Stretching is good. I need to stretch now. Being outside, me too. Especially after the pandemic, just being outside became such an important thing. Inspiring colleagues to think outside the box. Yeah, that's something that nourishes me too. Open community because they're always willing to share and collaborate. I agree. Heading out to nature, creative endeavors, exercise. Yeah, sausage sangas. I have no idea what that is, but it sounds interesting. Community and coffee. Is that an actual like event thing, Gemma? Community and coffee sounds like something that you do every week rather than a community and coffee separately. If it's not, someone should make it into a thing that we have in institutions. Let's do a community and coffee every Monday or something. Clear the clutter. Oh, you're one of those. I'm a very, very disorganized person. Sangas or sandwiches. Okay, I did not know that. Connecting with students again in person. Yeah, me too. I was so worried about going back in person when we first did a year ago. But connecting with students and seeing how they wanted to be together made a huge difference to me. Turkish coffee sometimes. Yeah, I don't like Turkish coffee, but I know people who like it really do. I really like it. Okay. All right. So I wanted to start with this quote from Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategy. She says, building community is to the collective as spiritual practice is to the individual. And I feel that a lot. And I think a lot of times people talk about open education and they don't emphasize the element of community, although I think Adrian just did that right now. And he was talking about how the open community shares. And so people who are in the open education area tend to be like that. And to me, it's like a spiritual practice as well. And another thing that I really like from Adrienne Marie Brown's book is she talks about this generosity and asking if we actively practice generosity and vulnerability in order to make connections between others, between us and others, right? Clear, open, available, and durable. And generosity means giving of what you have without strings or expectations attached. Vulnerability means showing your needs as well. And for me, I think open education is a lot about this. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but the idea which Adrienne Marie Brown talks about is interdependence, not being about the equality of offers in real time. So it's not about I give you today so that you can give me back today, but about giving and giving and giving and believing that someday it will come back, not necessarily equal, not necessarily the same time, but it also means that when we're feeling vulnerable, to ask and to take when we need it, knowing that there will come a day when we will give back. because I think a lot of times we don't ask when we need something because we feel like we have to give back right away. Also, another term is sort of open scholarship. Is when we're open about our scholarship. So not necessarily with our educational materials, but with our scholarship beyond making our articles open access, but just being open on social media, on blogs and things like that about our processes of how we share things. And I can't remember where I came up with this metaphor of it being like scattering rose petals. But it's because you're not giving someone a whole rose that's complete and ready and open for them, to see your final peer-reviewed paper or book that you publish. But it's a little bit like scattering thoughts all over the place, and then people then bring them together and create their own rose maybe sometimes, but then you get to see the impact of it over time. So it's not in one session or in one artifact, Okay, so before I start talking, one of the ways I'll manage my time today, and probably not going to be very good at managing my time in the 5 a.m. region, so it helps to know how familiar people are with the terms open pedagogy or open educational practice. They're not identical, but they're similar enough that, if you're familiar with one, you probably understand the other. James, I agree. Open process is underemphasized. We'll talk about that today. So if you've never used Slido before, this is a polling tool. And yeah, it's slido.com. You don't need to log in or anything. You can either use the QR code and vote with your phone, or you can go to slido.com and put the code, which is 3956435. So I just want to know how familiar people are so that I don't over-explain something that most people know. But definitely, if there's even one person who doesn't know what it is, I'll still explain, but I'll just, spend less time explaining than if people aren't familiar with these terms. Because you've already been in OE week. I don't know how long you've been, so. Is it working? Let me try. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes my internet is slow. And so it takes a while to hear your votes.
We can definitely, on Slido, I can see the responses coming through, but it doesn't seem to be mirroring.
Oh yeah, you can see them. I can't. So this is funny. Yeah, that's odd. So I'll just join from my phone. Maybe I'll be able to see what you guys can see. What's it looking like?
It
what are the
looks
majority
like
of people saying, David?
The leader at the moment is have a good idea what they mean, but have not applied them in practice. And that's closely followed. So that's about 34% of people. Then 26% is have a vague idea. And then after that, we've got have practiced them.
Yeah,
followed by never
I can
heard
see
of
it
the
now
terms.
on my phone.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, David. Thank you. Oh, here, now it shows. Okay. Thank you so much for making the extra effort with me. All right, so this to me means I will show some definitions, but try to focus more on the practice. That's what it feels like from this. All right, what about these terms? All right, how familiar are these terms to you? MOOCs, OER, Creative Commons licenses, and open access. So just which ones are familiar is it's going to be good. I know someone just joined us. Welcome. I think it was Laura or something. We're using Slido to vote on a couple of things. You can just go to either the QR code with your phone or slido.com with the code 3956435. The code is on the screen on the left. You guys can see the code, right? Even if I don't say it out loud.
Yeah,
all
we
right.
can see it. Definitely.
Awesome. So we have around 50 people and 36 have voted. Just wait a couple minutes, but it looks like everyone's quite familiar with most of these things. So that's really good to hear. So the basics of, I think these were to me like the basics of openness are familiar to the majority of people. MOOCs obviously as being, free open online courses, and the M is for massive, right? And then people have been talking about these for like, oh my God, it's been 11 years since 2012, but they've also actually existed from before then, just not hype around them. And open educational resources, the majority of people know what this is, and those differently from MOOCs. The MOOCs are like, you know, a course that you follow and you get maybe a certificate or something, whereas open educational resources are available for other people to reuse and whatever, but they're not part of a course that you finish or anything. People put their stuff out with something like a Creative Commons license, which allows other people to either reuse with attribution, or reuse and edit if they want, or not edit it if somebody puts that limit on it and things like that. And open access is related to usually journal articles just being freely available, not subscription based. All right. And which of these practices have you used in your teaching and or scholarship? Welcome, Annette. I know you just joined us. We're voting on things using Slido. You can either use the QR code at the top left or go to slido.com and the code is 3956435. All right, so blogging seems pretty popular, and other social media as well. I'm curious, when you said other social media, I'm curious what other social media you used other than blogging and Twitter. Yeah, Perusal is similar to Hypothesis, but more commercialized, I would say. I don't think they have a free version. They usually integrate with learning management systems or virtual learning environments. I don't know what you guys call it in Australia. Oh, LinkedIn. Yeah, sure. Yeah, a couple of people saying LinkedIn. I didn't used to use it a lot, but when people started to leave Twitter, I started to use it a little bit more. All right. So actually, you all are pretty familiar with a lot of things. All right. That's good. Great to hear. And Mastodon Ash. Yeah, that's another one that also I've used for a while, but definitely people are using it more because of what's happening with Twitter. All right, thank you all. So one of my favorite definitions or understandings of openness relates to what Catherine Cronin has written about it, being contextual, personal, and continually negotiated. So I resist any like one definition of what openness means and what open education means. And she has an expansive view of it, right? And practices, including creating, using, and reusing open educational resources, but also open pedagogies related to open sharing of teaching practices, right? So Cheryl Hodgkinson Williams and Henry Trotter from South Africa, were talking about, you know, the open educational practices being the things that undergird individual or collaborative conceptualization, creation, curation, circulation of OER. And those practices that we use to create resources that are openly available to others also can include practices that themselves we call open pedagogies, things like crowdsourcing and open peer review, and using open technologies, including like social media, but also open source technologies, and then creating things that encourage copying and reuse, as well as adaptation of other people's resources and recuration and recirculation. So it's this openness to learning from things that others have provided for us with the intention for us to reuse them as we like or to adapt them as we like. I also like Robin DeRosa and Rajiv Jangyani's way of talking about it, being access-oriented, being learner-driven, relating to the process, and also enabling students to shape public knowledge. So it's not just educators who create open resources, but also students themselves being part of the creation of public knowledge commons, right? They're not just consumers of it. And Sarah Lambert, who is from Australia herself, and also a GoGN person, Adrian and I were talking about that earlier. Yeah, thanks, Ash. Sarah Lambert talks about not only being about free digitally enabled materials that are open, but also including experiences, not just materials, and also that she sees them as being primarily by and for the benefit and empowerment of non-privileged learners who may be underrepresented in education systems or marginalized in their global context. So one of the things I started to think about, I'm from Egypt, and there's an author, and he was a minister of education, I think, at some point also. His name is Taha Hussein, and he used to say, "Al-ilm kal-ma' wal-hawa." So knowledge is like water and air. And in what ways do you think he meant? Like, what does it mean to say knowledge is like water and air? In what ways is open education especially like water, or should be? Let's see what you guys got. Can't live without it. I love that. All around us, Melina. Yes, Vanessa. Essential for life, flowing for everyone. It pervades. Vital for life. Required. Shapeless. That's a very interesting one, Lissy. I like that a lot too. I think that applies a little bit to open education too. Not necessarily in a positive connotation, but yes. Essential to human survival and nourishment, exists naturally and in the public commons. Essential and should be free, Marion. Yeah, I think for the most part, people took it to mean that he thinks it should be free, even though actually water isn't necessarily free, isn't necessarily, especially access to clean water isn't necessarily an easy thing, right? Especially in the global south and emerging economies. It gives growth. Annette, I really like that. It's powerful, David, especially that picture that I have, like that gif with the water flowing in your face. Lissy, could be flexible in multi-shapes also. I like that a lot. Yeah, with your shapeless. I understand what you mean. It's good too. And that's also, yeah, you can mold it however you like. That really applies to open education, right? Transient, momentary, until you get a more different stuff. Can stink, taste bad, or be palatable and glorious. I love that, Andrew. So you can use it well and you can use it badly and you can do bad things with it. Takes on the context it's in. I like that, Ash, a lot. It's a human right. Nice. I love that. Streams of information flow into oceans of knowledge. Ooh, Rosemary, you went one step further. I think I love what you did with that. Olga, flowing, ubiquitous, Amara, frank for everyone, and essential to life. Thank you all so much. Every time I ask these questions, I learn things from the way you interpret them, and I love a lot of what you all said here. And I agree they all apply to open education, I think. So what are some examples of open educational practices or open pedagogy that you know of? All the things that I asked you about earlier, like MOOCs and like blogging, and all of those are some examples of open educational practices. Oh, one more thing from Andrew, that it can be bottled or polluted or transported or transferred. I love that. Andrew, you've gone really far with this. I like that a lot. So what are some open educational practices that you yourself know of or you've been part of? Public lectures, Olga. Renewable assignments, Ash. So in case people don't know what renewable assessments or assignments are, would Mais or Ash like to, maybe Ash, if you're willing to unmute and describe that, or shall I do that? I think you should be able to unmute yourself and describe those if you want to.
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess that one can be, it can be many things, but just one example is where students will put together an OER by, maybe they each write case studies that, relate to the discipline that they're studying, and then it all gets collated by maybe their teacher and then published as an open book for other students to use in future courses.
Exactly. And so the renewable element is that other people can use it. It's not something you give to the teacher and then that's it. It disappears from life after the class is over. It continues to have value, right? Beyond the class. So that's what renewable assignments or assessments usually. Annette talked about SlideShare. Yeah, so people sharing their slides in a place where other people can find them for sure. Open certificate programs, definitely. Creation of digital artifacts like textbooks, definitely. The process of creating them is an open educational practice, right? The books are open educational resources, but the process of doing them. Communities of practice, definitely, especially when they're open and not confined. Open assessment, open textbook creation, using creating OER, yes. Wikis, and lots of wonderful communities of practice. Yes, so that's a lot of what these things are. All right, so some of the kinds of OEPs that we might discuss. See, the first two you guys already talked about, sort of. So student-created OER and renewable assignments, which may be a student-created OER, they may be other things, but things that students do that can be useful. Having an open syllabus, MOOCs we talked about briefly, open courses in general, Wikipedia editing, someone mentioned wikis. So of course you could create a wiki, just a collaboratively edited website, or Wikipedia itself, and editing it would be contributing to the knowledge commons, right? Public blogging and scholarship, and collaborative annotation. A lot of you already know Hypothesis, which is a collaborative annotation tool. So is Perusal. And Susan talks about learning by solving real world problems. And virtually connecting, which is something that I co-founded, but if we have time, we can talk about that. All right, so I don't know how many of you are familiar with Nancy Fraser's, yeah, I agree, James, all of the Wikimedia sister projects, so contributing images to Wikimedia. I don't know all the sister projects, but definitely Wikimedia is one. Is the larger foundation, actually. All right, so Nancy Fraser's framework about social justice has three dimensions of what social justice is. Can be economic injustice, so giving access to those who could not otherwise access learning experiences, but the experience itself becomes unchanged. So you're just redistributing wealth, right? And a lot of times people think about open education as something that does that, but there's more to social justice than giving people things for free, right? So there's cultural injustice. And to create cultural justice reform, you would not just give access, but you would also redesign what you're doing with the minorities in mind so that they are represented in what the work you do. So you're not just saying, I'm going to create a textbook, it's going to be free, take it. But to say, oh, actually, this textbook is written from an American perspective, and you are Indigenous people in Australia who are my audience, and therefore we need to incorporate your perspective into it and incorporate your culture and your examples and your ways of learning, for example. And this is a kind of recognizing. But there's another level, which is political injustice. And this, to redress that, you would go beyond giving access and into involving those who normally don't have access in the redesign. So if it's an American textbook and we want to redesign it for Australia, we would not just incorporate Indigenous perspectives into it, we would involve Indigenous learners and educators in the process of redesigning it. And it's not just about equitable representation or tokenistic representation, but it's about parity of participation, making sure that when they go and be part of this redesign, that they have parity of participation. They are equally able, they have equal power to decide how that process goes, and not just to follow our process, but bring their perspective. But possibly, when you think about it, not give them a ready-made table to work with, but let them bring their own table and let them bring their own ingredients and design it however they want to and use the process that they're good with. And so open educational practices aren't one thing, and it's not a neutral activity, I agree. It's a political activity all the time. And it definitely challenges the existing environment, for sure. We can do open educational practices that are very content-centric, but we can also do them that are process-centric. We can do open educational practices that are all about the teacher doing the work, or we can do them by centering learners. And an open educational practice that we do in our teaching could be for pedagogical reasons, and that's totally fine. You can do something because it's going to help people learn better, but it can also be for social justice reasons, because you're trying to address a particular injustice in your process. And any combination of these along the spectrum, and a lot of things are both, right? And even the pedagogical, it can be a cognitive type of learning, could be a behavioral, could be an affective type of learning. And obviously the social justice could be economic, cultural, or political. And just to keep in mind that whenever we try to redress injustice, the kind of thing we do could be just ameliorative and just fix a small thing in a very local context, or it can be transformative and fix it in a systemic way. But also it can be transformative for one group of learners, but be neutral for another group, or even negative other groups. So it's not that one thing is totally solving a social justice issue. Sometimes as you try to support one group, you can harm another group. So one example of an open educational practice and open educational resource that I've been part of, and I'm going to put in the chat over here, is these community building resources that I co-built with others. And the idea was, I don't know if any of you actually have seen these before, but we built these in what was summer for the Northern Hemisphere, so winter for you guys, like August 2020. And it was because a lot of people were entering into a new academic year where everything was going to be fully online, and they had never taught online before. They had caught up with online during the pandemic, emergency remote teaching. They had no idea how to build community online. And those of us who had been doing this for a while realized that we'd been doing a lot of it asynchronously, but a lot of the teaching was happening synchronously, and people had no idea what to do. So, and we also knew educational developers were burnt out. They were supporting entire institutions, which is much more than they normally did. And some people didn't have access to educational development support. And so we created these resources with templates and demos and ideas of how do you build community online. So we gave videos and slides and links. And we gave ideas for introductory activities and warm-up activities and ongoing conversations and how to set the tone. And the idea there is the process of creating it was pretty open. Lots of people came in and participated. And towards the end, we were like, hey, we're going to record a video today. Does anybody want to join? And does anyone want to contribute? Thanks, nice. All right. And so the process was open, but also what came out of it was open, and people could just reuse it however they wanted. And I could have, anybody can just do this for their own institution and keep it inside the learning management system or VLE, whichever term you use. But then if you're going to do the effort anyway, why not make it open to everybody else to use, right? And the other thing about it, though, is this would not be fully equitable if we didn't also consider that some people had Zoom and some people had Teams and some people had some other tool. Some people couldn't do synchronous because the bandwidth wasn't good enough. And some people had students who wouldn't turn their cameras on. And so when we, which was me, my context, the thing is, we kept giving adaptations to every single thing. So we'd say, oh, if you don't have breakout rooms, here's another way you could do this. Or if your students won't turn their cameras on or they can't for whatever reason, here's what you can do. If you have to do this asynchronously, here's another way to do it. So making it adaptable, making a group of people from all over the world participate in creating it was part of that process. So let's do a group activity now using the annotation tool on Zoom. So it looks different in different versions of Zoom, but usually at the top of your screen, there should be something that says you are viewing Mahabali's screen, and then there's a view options thing, and underneath it, there's an annotate. And then you could use the stamp option here to say what you think, where we're going to go. So yes, David is doing it. Does anybody else want to practice? Nice. Yes. All right. Awesome. So the stamp makes it easier, but if you're like on an iPad or a phone or any tablet, you won't have the stamp option, but you could use other things. All right, awesome. You guys can do this. All right, stop now so that we can move on to the next thing. I'm going to clear your annotations. Oh, where's my, I need to clear your annotations now. And close it so I can move on to the next slide. All right, so a student-authored textbook, where does it go along this spectrum, do you think? Closer to process or content? Closer to teacher or learner? Closer to pedagogical or social justice purpose? There's no right or wrong answer. I just want to see where we lie, and then I'll ask people some more. Yeah, so definitely learner-centric, right? Because a teacher could create their own open textbook, but the more you're involving learners, it's more learner-centric. So it seems we agree on that. People seem to be in the middle in terms of content and process-centric, and I think that's a good medium to imagine. It depends obviously on how the teacher would do it. All right, the one about pedagogical versus social justice is interesting. People are in the middle about that. Would anyone like to say why they went in one direction or another, or why they said in the middle? I guess people could raise their hands, and whoever raised their hand first in this case, then explain. Would anyone like to share why they chose pedagogical versus social justice? Okay, Adrian, go ahead.
I suppose it depends on context. What are you intending to do as part of the activity? And so for me, it is, where does it fit within the learner experience and what are the outcomes? Does that make sense?
Yes, of course. And sorry, I didn't mean to delete all your annotations when I stopped sharing the screen. It just did that automatically. But yes, it depends on the context. So we could be creating a student-authored textbook about white dominant ideology, right? So yes, it's learner-centric. Yes, it's process-centric. But then the content culturally is not promoting social justice, right? Or you could be doing it with students that are themselves majority. But if you're doing it with students who are minorities, and if you're doing it about a topic that in itself promotes social justice, a topic like feminism or racism or something like that, that in itself the topic redresses social injustice, or even could be a general topic that's neither positive or negative in terms of social justice, but that you make a point of using material that comes from indigenous perspectives, for example. These are the ways that you can make it something that promotes social justice, right? So it's not going to necessarily do that unless you're very, very intentional about it. What about Wikipedia editing? Where does it lie? Let's annotate this as well. All right, the majority are towards content-centric, which kind of makes sense, right? Because you're creating the content. Although, I mean, if you're doing it as part of a class, you could be emphasizing the process, but the content is pretty central to this. It could be pretty learner-centric. I guess if the learners also get to choose what they do, it would be teacher-centric, I think, a little bit. Obviously not the teacher doing it, but the teacher controlling what the learners end up editing, right? So you could say, oh, you edit this page, or you edit that page in that language in that way, versus, okay, go edit something relating to the course on Wikipedia. You choose what you want to do, right? So you can make it more or less learner-centric. All right, the pedagogical versus social justice. I'm seeing a lot on the social justice side. So I am very curious, and I'm not gonna unshare my screen because that loses the annotations. Welcome, Colin. I saw you just came in. So I'm curious about those who wrote that doing Wikipedia editing is a social justice thing. Would one of you be willing to share? Olga saying Wikipedia is itself about social justice, access to free information. Would anyone else like to add? Also, if you'd like to raise your hand or type in the chat, whatever feels right to you. Also can be edited at any time, yes. I'm not sure how being edited at any time makes it more towards social justice, though. Oh, the other way. All right, I'm pedagogical. All right, not towards social justice. All right. Okay, I want to actually challenge that editing Wikipedia is necessarily a social justice thing. Lots of voices are missing. Jenny, thank you. So Mice talks about the ability to track history, which is very useful, actually. Ash, the fact that it can be contextualized is a good thing. But, you know, for the most part, there are people there who argue in that back end that Mice is discussing about, and the dominant person usually wins, or the editor, who's usually a white man. So Jenny, lots of voices are missing from Wikipedia. And this is one of the well-known things that historically, there are more biographies of men than women. There's more information about certain parts of the world than others. The criteria for the kind of references you can use means that there are certain types of knowledge that aren't acknowledged as good enough to be used as references on Wikipedia. James talking about textbooks and encyclopedias are old, more innovative in open ed. Yeah, you can be more innovative than that because Wikipedia is just like one thing. It is subject to misinformation a little bit, Andrew, but there are editors who are trying to make sure that it isn't. But in the process of doing that, a lot of certain perspectives then get not listened to, you know. That's how where you can see the background conversation. Yes, Ash, right, exactly. Oh, you're from UNISA. It must be really early for you too then, if you're in South Africa. But yes, for me, the key thing about Wikipedia is when we're editing Wikipedia, are we editing things that already have a lot of information? Or are we, for example, I know Wikimedia in Ghana, for example, they say, we'll do a Wikipedia edit-a-thon and we will add more content from Africa. That would be a social justice use. There are feminist hackathons, so that would be a social justice use of Wikipedia. Or we will do biographies of women, things like that, versus just editing things that are already dominant knowledge, right? And Adrian is saying, is the ability to author Wikipedia evenly distributed? I would say it's not. Yes, because at the beginning it was harder to edit and the majority were white men. People may not have the digital literacies to know how to edit Wikipedia and so on. But yeah, Wiki education does encourage projects to address gaps. So I think they know this issue and they've been working on it. Now I'm almost out of time and I need to give you guys time to ask questions. So what I'm going to do is, you have the slides, right? We don't need to do every single thing here. Just think about any projects you're working on. How could you include more social justice in the projects you're working on, whether it's open education or not, and not just on the economic front. The economic front is obvious and it's important, it's necessary, of course, but the social, the cultural and the political are so important. I also, there's this umbrella image of useful only if open that was in one of the OE Global conferences. And I think it's interesting to say that because I think umbrellas can be useful if they're not open, and they can be harmful. So I don't think we should just say that. And I think I've been thinking for a while that openness and social justice need to be entangled together. You need to know both and to apply them to your purpose, your process, the people you work with, and your product and the end product that you create. And I'm just going to skip over this entire part, but you can look at it later. It has the examples of I'll just put a link to this book called Open at the Margins, which has a lot of marginal perspectives about marginal, because, you know, open at the margins, perspectives about open education that are different from what you would hear in the more mainstream. And just think about intentional adaptation in your process and less prep, more presence. This is from Adrienne Marie Brown again. So if you could just tell me a key takeaway in the chat, and I am open for your questions. And this is my email, my Twitter, and I know you're going to give feedback to UTS, so I'll just ask them to send me that feedback instead of getting it on my own feedback form. Thank you so much. You have exactly 4 minutes to ask questions. All right, James, your takeaway is striving for radical transparency. I love that term. I don't think I've heard it before. I like it a lot. I've been talking about transparency in the use of AI in the classroom. You know, like inviting students to be transparent of how much AI they've used. But I think that applies to a lot of things. And also radical transparency makes me think about being open about our processes. So it's not just sharing things openly, but in the telling people how we did it and why we did it the way we did it. Vanessa's talking about product and process. Anthony loves using the annotation option. You hadn't seen the stamps before? All right, cool. For Adrian. How are you feeling? What nourishes you? Yeah, I just learned recently, Adrian, from a book called Extended Mind. I just like last week, that articulating how you feel already calms you down, which I had never thought about. I've been doing this for like 3 years now. But it turns out that articulating, and I think starting with what nourishes you puts you in a good mood because it reminds you of all the things you enjoy. So it puts me in a good mood when I learn what other people enjoy too. Ash is saying we need to explain social justice aspect open more than we do. Yeah, not assume it's obvious, exactly. And it's not necessarily going to happen either. I mean, not just that it's not obvious, it might not actually be happening. Lisa or Liza, explore, okay, great. Yes, the slides. Miss just put them back in again. I put them several times. Oh, thank you, Rosemary. That's awesome. All right. I'm going to stop reading the comments in case someone wants to actually ask a question. I mean, I'm reading them, but I'm not going to read them out loud. I mean,
I can see
a question from Andrew, right?
actually has
Yeah.
a question.
Yeah,
I'll read it out.
Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Is social justice different based on position and context? Is it absolute? Does it matter if it is part of anything open? Can't it be a state of something fixed too?
Definitely. All of that. Yes. It is very positional. And that's also why who's social justice, James is saying, right? So, and this is also why I say something you do could be transformative for one group of people, but not others. And it could be the same thing that you do in a certain context that is positive, and in another context it's not, for sure. So, for example, I would say very high profile white male scholar, you invite them and you don't pay them. I think that's a social justice thing. Yeah, you're doing well, you don't need the money, you just, come, thank you for being open and doing this. But then if you invite like an indigenous person to come and do something and you say, oh, well, you're going to do this also for free, it's a very different situation, right? So that's an example of that. There's also pretty much everything is, depends on the positionality and the intersectional power, and that power changes. So, for example, I always tell my students, as a Muslim person in Egypt, I'm the dominant majority. So I'm not going to complain about oppression in my country. I'm from the majority. But when I lived in the US and in the UK, I am the minority in that context. So in that context, I do face microaggression and systemic oppression and all of that. So those things make a huge difference. So when I start a session here in Egypt with Assalamu alaikum, which is totally understandable and known, but there are Christian minorities here, it can feel like, why are you doing that? Whereas when I do it here, I'm just bringing something from my culture and it's not offensive. And of course, it's not open education per se, right? It's not about open education. I'm removing the spotlight from myself. It's everywhere. I'm just applying a social justice framework onto open education. So there's another question. Where'd you find good examples? So there's actually an open pedagogy notebook by Terry Green. If someone can find that link, it should be easy to find. So you can find a lot of those, but also there's a paper by Catherine Cronin, Rajiv Jangiani, and myself, which is linked in the slides, where the categorization of OEP comes, where we give at least 8 or 9 examples of open pedagogy and where they lie on the spectrum and how you can adapt it to make it more towards social justice, for example. Yes, that's probably it. Thank you, David. Did I miss any other questions while I was talking? I don't think so, right? I think I was reading. Does anybody want to ask anything out loud? Oh, thanks for posting about the book.
Well, if there are no more questions, last chance.
Not
Okay,
the last chance. They can email me
no,
later
yeah,
or
that's right.
send me on Twitter as Mice discovered. LinkedIn, yeah, I'm more on LinkedIn than I used to be, but Twitter is better. But if you're not on Twitter, LinkedIn or email will work.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maha, on behalf of everybody here today. It was such a fantastic experience and interactive session, very enjoyable to see all that. I just want to remind everybody there's a feedback form somewhere in the chat. I can't remember where the link went for that, but we've also got an event tomorrow on
Mace
open
is great with the
textbooks.
links.
Yes, yes, very fast, quick fire on the links. Tomorrow's event, Open Textbooks is the way of the future with Amanda White. And then for the UTS only people, sorry, there's another event on Friday, places you can find UTS resources to reuse, adapt and share. So thank you all for coming. And again, massive thanks and huge applause for our guest, Professor Mahabeli.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Mice, for inviting me and for going after me because I didn't respond on LinkedIn at first and finding me on Twitter. All right. Thank you, everybody. I really enjoyed this. And now I have to go wake my daughter up for school. Have a good rest of your day. Bye.